Carlton King is a former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast, the show which shines a light on the secret world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but more importantly, looks at this world from the perspective of geopolitics. That is, what you're living, how you're living, regardless of where you are all over the world, the interconnections that come about. So what I want to do is put all these different worlds together. Now, sometimes I just talk about that world from my perspective, but I find the best way of doing that is speaking to individuals from around the world who basically have a great knowledge of their sphere of influence, which in fact could be more important than my sphere of influence. And this is what I've been doing for the last 3 recordings, is looking at people in what I would simply call the power play. And if you want to really revamp and see what that is, it's all about the money. So it's the money people I've been talking to. The people, money of the past and the way that worked, money of now, and potentially the shock of the future money and how that's going to work. So that lends me and leads me along to a guy called Ron Bienvenu. I think that's the French pronunciation of it. And he is an individual from the United States of America, from good old New Orleans, who basically is going to talk to you and explain to you how what he calls the fourth shock, the mobility and rise of demand data dominance, is going to change our world. Ron, thank you very much for being on the show, my friend.
Carlton, thank you for having me. Really excited.
It is an honor, an absolute honor to have you on. And wow. I'm intrigued. I mean, we spoke a little bit a few days ago. I'm intrigued to get into the weeds, if you will, of this world which you inhabit and what you've done in it. But what I want to know, and I guess what the listeners will want to know, is how you actually got to this position in the first place. I mean, who are you? Who is Ron Bienvenu?
Bienvenu. Nothing like a French word said by an Englishman, man. That sounds slick. Well, thank you. It's been I would say it's a non-traditional journey. I grew up in Louisiana, but not in New Orleans. I grew up in a very small town called St. Martinville, Louisiana.
Right.
And it's the first permanent Cajun settlement. It was founded in 1756, and it was founded by a bunch of French immigrants who were exiled from Nova Scotia by the British and the Americans during what we call in America the French and Indian Wars. Yeah. And the American colonists and the Brits invaded Nova Scotia, threw out all the French. Yep. Those were my ancestors, and they ended up on the western edge of the largest swamp in North America, the Atchafalaya Basin. And so I grew up in a swamp and a small town, about 4,000 people, and very rural. But as a child, I was interested, always fascinated in the 70s with technology. I read a lot of history. I read tons of history as a child, and military history in particular. And but I was always fascinated with computers. And back in the late 70s, I built my first computer out of a kit that you could buy online. But online, you couldn't buy them online. There was no online. You could buy it. And then I then got a TRS 80, which my father handed me because somebody put in money and they didn't have any money. And it was one of the original Tandy computers. And so he didn't know what to do with it. So he handed it to me. And so I taught myself how to write software.
Brilliant.
And so I was always fascinated with computers long before anybody knew what that was. When I graduated from high school, I went to university. I went to Louisiana State University. And I wanted to study computers, but they didn't have a computer class back then. All they had was mainframe. And I wasn't interested in that. So I went to school for a couple of years studying economics. And then and I ran out of money. So I said, well, and I never took student loans. My family didn't have any money. And so I went to the Army. And so when I got to the Army, they said, what do you know how to do? I said, I know how to write code. And they said, what the hell's that? And so they sent me to Fort Gordon, the Signal Corps. And I spent, most of my Army career in Georgia, Fort Gordon, Georgia. When I got out of the Army, I went back to LSU thinking I'd finish school, but I got a chance to come to New York City and visit a friend. And I took a train. I didn't have any money for a plane. So I took a train from New Orleans to New York. And when I walked out of Penn Station on 7th Avenue, I'm like, this is it. This is where I'm staying. And I sold everything I owned. I had $1,600 and I didn't have a job, didn't have a college degree, didn't have a friend. And the guy I came to see was only here for 30 days. And so anyway, but I made it. I loaded trucks from midnight to 9 a.m. in New Jersey. I literally lived behind filing cabinets in an office for a little while, slept on the floor. But I was always still hacking code. And after about a year of that, I came up with an idea for a software company. And I called up my buddy from the Army. And I said, you got any money, Tori? He's like, no. I said, me neither, but I got this idea for a software company. So he said, let's try. So we moved to Washington, D.C., slept on the floor of a condemned building for 3 years, but built a little software company. It was an electronic fax newsletter business because we'd come up with the idea that we could take a print job and turn it into a bitmap and then dump that to a fax board. It doesn't sound very exciting, but it basically, it's kind of funny story. I was listening to your intro about the money. So basically, me and Tori Nelson invented Adobe Acrobat years before, but we were kids. So coincidence will have it, in about 5 years ago, I ended up on the board of directors of a publicly traded company in San Francisco. And on the board is a guy named John Warnock. John is the founder of Adobe. And John, he's older, he's in his 80s. And we have this dinner for the board members. I had never met John Warnock. Mm-hmm. And so we're sitting there and, it's like, who's the coolest guy at the table? Everybody's got their stories. And so I lean back in my chair all cocky and I say, John, I invented Adobe Acrobat years before you did. And he goes, yeah? How much money you make from that? I said, I made it. I did all right. He says, I'm worth $12 billion. No one gives a shit. No one cares who invented anything. It's who makes the money from it. I like, duly noted, sir. And so put me right in my place. And he had a point. And so, and we built that company up and we sold it to a big publisher here in New York in 1991. I was 25 years old after sleeping on the floor of a condemned building for 3 years. And I worked for the big company for a year. And then I left to start my next company, software company again, called SageMaker. That one grew pretty big. Ended up buying a bunch of companies in the 90s. If you remember, the 90s were crazy.
Crazy. Yeah.
Great time to be a tech guy. It was so much fun. Yeah. Built a decent sized company. I sold that, bought a company in England. I actually bought a company in Swindon, England back then.
All right. What was that?
It was called Total. It wasn't Total. It was Global Recall. It was like a EAI. Yeah. And some old British guy had it. And I remember we paid $5 million for it. And I went to Swindon and I was like, holy crap, there's places like this in England? These guys might actually be able to kick our ass. And so they were tough. I had haggis for the first time and it was cool, man. Great. And, I'm from South Louisiana and we're called the Cajuns. And there's a bumper sticker down in South Louisiana. It's my favorite. It says, Cajuns make the best lovers because we'll eat anything. So I ain't afraid of no haggis. I'll eat haggis all day. So I sold that company to a big public company in Chicago. I commuted. At the time I was living in New York and had been here for a while. and commuted to Chicago for a year. Great, interesting time. So I worked for this company called Divine, which was buying companies. And we ended up buying almost 60 software companies in a year. Wow. And that's where I got my MBA on deal structures and finance. And I mean, I was really immersed. I mean, it was crazy. We'd have calls on Sunday nights that would start at 9 p.m. Eastern and go until 3 in the morning, going over every deal. It was crazy, but I learned a lot. But I also realized I didn't want to work for anybody. So I left it a year and a day later per my contract. And then I wasn't sure what I was going to do, Carlton. I was just like sitting around saying, I don't know, I'm not a big planner. I don't have these grandiose visions. I just do things that I think are interesting and hard. Mm-hmm. I like to overcome things. So I'm sitting around with my lawyer, who then became my business partner. And I decided I would start investing. I wanted to buy a software company. I had a vision on how to value software companies. Long story, but I ended up buying 7% of the stock of a public company called Mercator Software. It was doing about 140 million in revenue. And I was the largest shareholder, and I had ideas on how to improve the business. The internet bubble had burst, and it was a big mess. And I said, I think I have an idea. And having bought all those companies, I started to understand where real value was driven in software companies, as opposed to eyeballs and all that stuff. Wall Street had no idea how to value these things at the time. I'm still not sure they're great at it, but and so anyway, I bought the company thinking I would just go sit down with the CEO, explain to him how we changed things. He went to Harvard and Stanford, and he was a really smart guy. And here's my little country bumpkin self showing up, and I'm like, look, man, you could do this, cut all this cost, do this. He's like, he was having none of it, and it's a very colorful story. We could spend an hour talking just about that deal, but we won't. But long and short of it, he told me to go pound sand. And I said, no, I'm not going to pound sand. So I went to the board of directors and said, let's fire this idiot and let's go get somebody who knows what they're doing. They said no. So I said, screw it. I'm just going to buy the whole company. So I did my first hostile deal where I offered to buy the whole company, unsolicited offer. And they told me no. So at the time I had paid 94 cents a share for my stock. I filed my first 13D at the Securities Exchange Commission in November of 2002. Mm-hmm. And in February of 2003, I offered $2.17 a share for the whole company, which would have been about an $85 million deal. They rejected it. The stock was at about $1.40 at the time. So I ran my own board slate. Turned out to be a full-on hostile deal, crazy stuff. I can tell you story after story, a lot of colorful stuff. But bottom line is I wasn't going away. And about 30 days before the shareholder vote to vote on my board slate versus theirs, they agreed to my deal. But they wanted 90 days to beat it. And so a few months later, they came back with a deal for $3 a share from Essential Software. And so we sold. So I tripled my money in 9 months. And I'm like, well, this is fun. So I just have to be called a jackass by people. So that started my Wall Street side of things. And ever since then, that's, my primary focus is deals in really. But I'd always been thinking about like where value is being driven. And I'm fascinated with power. That's why I was kind of fascinated with your show, how it explores the deeper underlying sources of power, not just the obvious.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I find that interesting. And I watched technology change the world twice in my career, in the 80s and then in the 90s. And I'm like, what is going on here? And so I was really pondering, and then I started watching the cell phones start being prevalent around the world. And I envisioned that this was going to be another big moment in how business and governments interact and how wealth is created. So I wrote a book in 2009 called The Fourth Shock. And that explores 4 major events that have changed the way the world works. And we can talk more on that if you want. But
absolutely.
But then, and then since then, I've just been, like I said, doing deals. And now I'm writing The Fifth Shock because I believe we're at the cusp of the 5th major shift in wealth creation driven by technology. And I think technology that has evolved over the last, and in The Fourth Shock, I even alluded to it, saying we need a way to control data in the wild. But if we have a way to do that, you'll change the nature of human society. Yes. And that's what I think we're about to go through. And so that's called The Fifth Shock in my world parlance. And so it's exciting. It's terrifying, but it's also exciting. So that's my career. So I don't have a finance degree. I don't have a software degree. I've never taken a class on either. I teach a class at Tulane, a university in New Orleans, on hedge fund investing, and which is kind of ironic. Again, when they said, "Well, you should teach a class here," I'm like, "I don't even have a college degree. You want me to teach a class?"
Well,
like, no, you got Rero.
Well, you do know that in the great times of the British Empire, what you had the army full of officers who were basically the ruling elite's sons. Okay, so they were from the ruling elite's sons, and they were brought into the army. Just to pay for your uniform, you have to have some money, right? So especially units like the Guards or whatever. But in the Navy, no, it's different. And this is the point I thought of straight away with yourself when you're saying you don't have a degree. The point is this: in the Navy, Admiral Lord Nelson was basically a shipwright's son, basic guy who was not part of the ruling elite at all. But when you're in the Navy, the captain basically has to know where the ship's going to. Otherwise, everybody's finished. So you need people who know what they're doing. They can't, depend on luck, or they can't depend on the second or third lieutenant down the line is going to help them out for controlling the whole of a battle, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You have to know instinctively the way forward in a ship. And that's what you were doing. You're basically the guy who, forget what's behind your name, you know what it's like in the weeds in the battle. And that's actually more important than anything else. Because my experience of degree work, and I got one in criminology, was basically that in fact, I was marked down, to be quite true, for putting forward ideals and ideas on how things function and how they work, because they said, well, hang on, that's not what we're asking you to do. That's in a PhD. We're just asking you to read and say, this guy's done it right. This guy says this. So you basically regurgitate what people are saying rather than putting forward any of your own ideals. So for me, I don't think it's necessary. And I think that's one of the problems we've got. I think in the West now, we're laying way too much on what paper you come out with. And that doesn't necessarily get you the best people. People like you who have got an idea and say, you know what, I'm going to sleep for 2 years on the floor because I think I'm going to make it happen. I think those are the ones that move the world. All things equal, of course. Obviously, if you're prevented from moving the world because of whatever reason, that's different. But if all things are equal, these are the guys that make it happen. I call them the talented 10. It's not my statement. This comes from Dr. Dubois, but I'll take it. The talented 10. I think these are guys you're not going to hold down. No matter, they may not be the best good person. They may be the best bank robber. But the bottom line is they're going to do it.
I've always had a thing for pirates, man.
Well, there you go. Exactly. Freibeuter. These are basically guys out trying to make money on the sea. You got some skills and let's make it happen. So,
I tell you, I always tell people, Carlton, I almost never outsmart them, but I almost always outlast them. I'm just tougher than most people, and I just stick with it. And I'm not afraid to take a good beating. I think it's I learn more that way. I once gave a speech at Yale Business School, they call it, I forget what they call it, in 2001, and I walked out on stage. I said, "Wow, Yale! I mean, I'm a poor kid from South Louisiana. I don't even have a college degree, and I'll tell you." It's an honor to be here at Yale. You guys are all smarter than me. I said, I'm willing to bet every one of you in this room is smarter than I am. And, but I'm also willing to bet not a one of you is tougher than I am. And you want to be an entrepreneur, you better be willing to get your ass beat a lot. And so I believe that. I believe that toughness is unfortunately, it's sometimes it can be pigeonholed as toxic masculinity or whatever, but I just don't think we're developing mental toughness in our world as much as, I don't know if we ever developed it historically. It was just a fact of life.
Yes.
But now that we've gone so rich and so comfortable in our existence, I read in a book the other day that suicide kills more people than wars in the last couple of years. I mean, that's crazy. Anyway, that's a different subject. So I enjoy tough challenges. I love thinking differently and outside the box. And I agree with everything you said, that for me, it's a results. And I used to be ashamed that I didn't have a college degree. Like, I wouldn't talk about it and try to hide it. Now I take it as a point of pride.
Yeah.
In the Army, we had a saying, you train them so hard, they stop complaining and they start bragging. Oh, you think you got it, though? We got it, though. So I think I've kind of reached that line in my life.
Very good. Very good. So how did you find the Army?
We don't have a college degree. Don't fret. Just get on with it.
Exactly. How did you find the Army, Ron? This bit's interesting because I used to work for your Army some time ago. So how did you find it?
You mean, how did I like it?
Yeah, in terms of when you were in it, did it suit you? Were you able to function within it? Did it make you?
Oh, absolutely. I loved it. I'm not a very structured guy, but it taught me so much. I learned so much more in the Army than I ever learned in college, and about people. It exposed me to the world. It was tough. I loved it. I would have made the military a career. Until I realized, I've always been very independent minded. And I realized if you're a captain, because you've been in the Army 6 years and I'm a lieutenant or a sergeant, and I got to listen to you simply because you've been here 6 years, I'm like, that ain't going to work for me. Napoleon was a general at 19. I want to be a goddamn general. I don't want to wait till I'm 60 to be a general. But the skill sets I learned, the memories, the discipline, the commitment. I mean, I love basic training was like my ex-wife. I loved it. I just don't want to do it again. But and I do. I love my ex-wife. She's awesome. She's one of my best friends. But I don't want to be married to her. And I'm sure she feels the same. And so, but it was great, man. I would recommend it for everybody. And it's not even about patriotism, so say. Although I was quite proud to be in the Army, but. And am quite proud, but it's just the structure, the way of approaching problems, the severity of certain situations that you take for granted. And as a civilian, it's great. I really enjoyed it. And
excellent. Interesting. It's interesting because some person could turn around and say that's a character like you isn't made. Well, you basically said isn't made for the military. And I'll tell you why I said that. I mean, I worked for your military, and I've worked a lot with our military and other militaries, but I've never been in it, per se. So there is a difference. And I can remember being. It's going to sound crazy, but I can remember being in Iraq, and because of what I was doing, we were given the status of officers, and washing in the officers sort of area where you were washing, and it's Iraq, so it's war and all the rest of it, and. I can remember seeing blokes. I said, "All these fellas are washing in exactly the same way." And I mentioned their officers because these were like, from captains, colonels. Well, they're all washing. And I said, "What's this about?" Because they said, "Oh, ships washing." They said, so it's a specific time you can have water on, soap on, water off. That's how they do it. Yeah. And what they said is, when you join, they teach you how to wash.
Yeah.
So they teach you everything. I mean, I found that astounding that they teach you. And I guess it's what they explain is, you're getting people in from all walks of life. You don't know what they've done. So basically you break them all down and you basically say, this is how it starts from today. Sure. Anything you do that's not right is just not right by us. So I found that fascinating. But I thought independence within that process is surely problematic.
It's frustrating. That's why I didn't make a career of it. Napoleon said, insubordination is sometimes the sign of a great mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's, and I think, I don't know this because I got out in 91. I did 2 years regular and 4 years reserve right before the first Desert Storm. And so I really didn't do anything. And, but it was kind of your Navy reference. When stuff really matters, I think the Army can tolerate a lot more free-spiritedness. They almost reward it. Yeah. But in times of peace, I think it's a lot harder. So I don't know that. It's just my theory. But, Yeah, it's a balance, but it's impressive. And I'll tell you this. The opening scene of Gladiator, the movie, which came out in 2000, about it, and it's the whole battle scene where the Roman legion is facing these Teutonic barbarians, and I know this scene well because I pirated it for my company, and we put all our competitors' logos on the barbarians, and we put our logo on all the Romans, and we went out and crushed them. But I showed that at a sales kickoff in 2000, and I had some savage sales guys and gals. So I put it on a big screen down in Houston, Texas, and they're all fired up. And the Roman legion just is so disciplined. Yes. And it was fun to watch. It was funny. I can play. I'll send you a link to it. Yeah, it's funny as hell. But I said there's a reason why I'm playing this, and it's not just because I want to kill all our enemies. It's because look at the legion. It's disciplined. And if we're going to go from a small company that we were in the 90s to a global company, we can't do it the same way. We can't be a bunch of savages who are tough as nails and one-on-one ferocious, but the Legion will mow them down every time.
Yeah. Because
yes. And so, when I used when the artillery's firing, I'm like, that's our marketing department, softening up the enemy. And then the infantry moves forward. I'm like, that's our sales team going to, engage with the enemy. And it's just a great scene. I'll send it to you. You'll get a kick out of it.
Nice one. Yeah, I'll look at it.
So it's try to find this balance. It's almost yin and yang, to find the balance between chaos and order. And so if you look at the yin and yang of the path down the middle in the Taoist ideology is, that's the balance. It's when hot becomes cold, when cold becomes hot. If you're always hot, you're boring. If you're always cold, you're boring. It's the transitions in life that are the most interesting. Mm-hmm. And so in business, it's the same way. So I look for these global transitions. That's a lot of what the fourth shock was about. These transitions where was it Will Rogers who said, it's not what you don't know in life that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so. And the world changes, and people who cannot change, people who are always hot or always cold, they're always this or always that. When the world changes, and this has always been the West's secret sauce against totalitarian nations, when they get it right, not even totalitarians. I mean, the German culture, the Japanese culture, highly ordered and structured.
Highly ordered.
And when they get it right, they crush. But when the world changes, they have a hard time adjusting to change. And so our secret sauce in the West, and my secret sauce in my life, is I go where things are changing because I'm good at chaos and turning it into order. I say I'm not good at taking risk. I'm good at taking on uncertainty. Uncertainty is not risk. Uncertainty is the absence of risk. There is no way to measure it. Risk is measurable. It may be improbable. You may be a 1 in a million, but it's not. But it's measurable. So what an entrepreneur needs to be good at is not risk. It's taking uncertainty. I think there's something here, but I don't know what it is, and turning it into a measurable risk that an investor can then put money in. Yeah. Because investors are risk takers. They're not people who like to deal with uncertainty. And so that's my life. And that's the fourth shock was all about these 4 big moments of uncertainty where possibility exploded into the global economy and changed the way we live. And one of the great takeaways, I think that I didn't stress enough in the fourth shock, but I'm really working on in the fifth shock, is how economic and political power began to diverge, 500 years ago. And, prior to that, the Pope was the economic power and the political power. The king was economic power and political power. But it was the arrival of the mercantile class. And as we said the other day, when Napoleon derisively called this nation of shopkeepers, how can we lose a war to a bunch of shopkeepers? Let's be serious. But those shopkeepers, when, there's an old saying, no one washes a rental car. People care a lot more when it's theirs. And so these shopkeepers took their lives very seriously, as opposed to the poor people who were just being told what to do. But that was the beginning of a divergence, and that has accelerated, and it reached a turning point, a huge point in the early 1900s with the robber barons, and in particular, Rockefeller's company, Standard Oil, where Standard Oil, it was at one point was generating 25% of gross domestic product of the United States. That would be a company today would be doing almost $6 trillion in revenue. Okay,
Absolutely.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in revenue. So that's how powerful he was. But Rockefeller, and so that was the culmination of economic power threatening political power. And Teddy Roosevelt, said that's too much. And so he broke up Standard Oil. Mm-hmm. But the only reason he was able to break up Standard Oil, in my contention, is because Standard Oil's assets were predominantly in the United States. Yeah. And Roosevelt had an army and Rockefeller did. So from that point forward, economic power started to find ways to get around that conundrum. And I'm not saying this is conscious. I'm not saying there's some cabal of economic geniuses running around trying to circumvent political power. But if you're a rational person and you're building a global business and you don't want to end up like Rockefeller, well, how would you do that? Well, you need to spread your assets globally. And come in the 30s and leading into the World War II, Alan Turing, your British cohort there, really started to put down some real fundamental ideas about how information could be codified. And from that, we get the binary code, zeros and ones. And so this is the first shock. The first shock was the digitization of information, primarily as a war effort to move information and crack codes and do all kinds of cool stuff. And so that was the first shock. The first shock was the digitization of information. And that led to the first computers. And those computers were generally government controlled or very, very big business controlled that was basically working with government. But it started the process of being able to move information globally in real time. And then the second shock, which took a little longer, came in the 70s and the early 80s with the movement of, at that time, information was like a temple. You had to go to the high priest, you had to ask for permission, and it was very controlled. And then with the advent of personal computers and networking technology to connect those computers, generally, almost exclusively at the time, inside of firewalls of organizations, generally bigger companies, but you started to push computing power to the edge of organizations, and more people, individuals, were getting access to that power. So that accelerated the use of information technology. And then the third shock was the commercialization of the IP protocol in the 90s, which then allowed, again, through no mandate, pure evolutionary at work. No one said we're all going to use the IP protocol. There were hundreds of different protocols. Every system was on a different one. But the convenience, the economic convenience of connecting everybody through a standard allowed those firewalls to basically be penetrated for the first time. Mm-hmm. And we linked all these little islands together into one big system. And in each step of the way, it allows for different business models, more and more interesting.
I'm going to say something. Does that not only work when you've got a dominant cultural and economic and business power, which post the Second World War, the United States was? The United States comes out of that war, frankly, having lost few people, same as Britain, 450,000, and basically, unlike Britain, though, having not spent all of its money in order to stay alive within it. Yes, Britain's empire is bigger directly post the Second World War, but that empire is crumbling as that's happening. So what I'm saying is the Soviet Union lost, who knows, 25, 30 million, who knows? Who knows the figure? The Chinese lost 30 million. Who knows what the figure is? So what I'm saying is, out of this war comes clearly the United States, powerfully, doing things like the Marshall Plan thereafter and offering it to everybody so it can sell it into new markets. So basically what you've got there, realizing things like that, if we don't have Europe to sell into, we don't have Japan to sell into, where do we sell our goods? But also holding, if you will, a certain amount of militaristic power, particularly in South America and the African continent, where it could dictate, and then later on in the Far East, where it could dictate what's happening. So once you've got that, embracing power, and also I'll add soft power with things like Hollywood, the American life. I'll tell you this now, my friend. Most people look at police in the United Kingdom And when they think of police, they think of America. When they think of, they can tell you what the FBI does more than they can tell you what special branch or the security service does, because they're so conditioned culturally to what I could give the term of American cultural imperialism, that actually it's normal. You can see, people can see New York and they'll say, hey, New York, we've all been there. We've never been there, but we've all been there because we've seen it on TV so often. So what I'm saying is, if you then have that level of power, you can then move a lot of things to your advantage. And it may look as though it's not the government, but in a sense it is the government. Because in your system, the government is economic as well, isn't it? Most of the activities you undertake are taken at the behest, as they were in Britain, to be quite truthful. You see, one of the other things I was going to say, most of Britain's empire in the beginning comes about by private armies, the West India Company, the East India Company. These are companies. They're not British government. They're companies who hire people to fight wars on their behalf to take over India. And same in the West Indies and the area. They take them over as companies. Same happened in the All Africa Company. These are companies who then, after they've taken over, the British government says, you know what? We better, well, actually, they're forced to do it because the same people running these companies are so powerful, they can then say to the government, we need your military assistance. You see, so there's a symbiosis actually about how these things work that I guess worked in Japan in roundabout the same way, because I know going into Korea, they had that sort of element that they looked at, but not necessarily with China, which was more controlled by the state. And I'm talking throughout the dynasties, right? So what you're looking at is a way of doing things that companies orientated, and then the world follows the company.
That's an interesting perspective, and one I agree with. And certainly, I would tell you, there's a book called The Lords of Finance. I think World War II was won in the 30s by the Americans by manipulating the gold in the world. It's a fascinating book. Just listening to you talk, and you have to read this book. And it's very well written on a very dry subject, so it's a lot of fun. But I agree with you, and so my thesis running through the fourth shock is all these technological advances. The fourth shock being mobility and having computer power in every human's hands in the world, and everything that goes with that. And the fifth shock is the ability to then take data and secure it and sell it. And so you're going to see the change. I think it's the biggest shift of all. Yeah. But my contention is that each step along the way, as companies can spread risk globally, yes, and they can manage property globally. So in Rockefeller's day, how much oil did we produce in Singapore? Gee, man, I don't know. We got to wait for a boat to get here to tell us how much oil came out. And by the time it gets here, we don't even know what's gone. So it's a lot harder to manage global assets historically. But it's now companies are spreading risk globally, but governments remain, even the hegemon, the United States, remains fairly geographically focused. So now that's not to say the U.S. government or several other governments don't have the ability to project power around the world, but like there's two sources of I would argue in the fourth shock, there are two sources of global power left for government: army, military, and the ability to print money. Okay. Blockchain is a direct assault on the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve's ability to control money supply. Yeah. And that's not going to be a quiet fight. And I know many people, I have this conversation with lots of the smartest people on the planet. And, a lot of them think that, they'll figure out a way to do what you said. They'll let the blockchain guys go out, and then they'll come in the back end they'll let the economic guys run loose. And then the government guys will come in and pick it up in the end. I don't know. We'll see. And also the military, which you well know. There's a lot of private armies running around the world today. Absolutely. The U.S. used a lot of private armies in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah. So So the fifth shock really is the idea that the ability to move data around the world in a secure fashion so you can monetize it, which you couldn't do prior to certain types of technologies like blockchain and NFT, is going to create the ability of global corporations to increase the value of their data assets radically and create what I call virtual monopolies. They won't have to do Rockefeller's monopoly where they owned everything. They will have the ability to use the data from everybody in their supply chain, and they will monetize that data because they will know more about supply and demand of all goods and services. And then they can capitalize on that through a trading activity. And in the fourth shock, my favorite chapter is the chapter on Enron. And what Enron figured out was that they had the only gas pipeline that went from New York to California. So they knew more about the supply and demand relationship of gas, natural gas. So their genius was they said, why don't we invert the business model? And so what I mean by that is historically, if you had a gas pipeline company, gas is coming in, let's say $2 a BTU, a British thermal unit, and it's being sold at $4. And so, but the price is always moving because it's a commodity. So it goes up, it goes down based on all kinds of things. So you want to lock in your profits. So if you're a traditional gas pipeline, you would buy futures contracts that would say, I'm going to get $4 a BTU forever and $2 for as many years as I can. And I lock in my $2 spread. And now I know what I'm going to make over the next year or 2 years. And you just keep doing that. So you're using trading activities as a hedge against production risk.
Yes.
Enron said, why don't we flip that? We already know, why don't we use production as a hedge against trading risk and become a trading company and make money trading natural gas because we have our own pipeline that we own and we know more and nobody else has this information. It's ours. So they were able to kill it. And they went from being a little podunk pipeline company in Omaha to the sixth largest company in America in 10 years.
So what you're basically saying is you're basically saying that they took the OPEC model.
Yes. But they controlled the whole thing. And so there was going to be no cheating. They didn't have partners. And so, but they had to own the pipeline. Now, where they went off the rails is they started trading electricity futures. Yeah. And because at that point they thought they were the smartest traders in the world because look how easy it is. We make so much money. And so they started trading things they didn't have any insights on. And that's when they started to lose money. So the first thing they did was they went buy a power plant in Oregon so they would know how much demand was coming out of California, one of the largest markets for electricity. And they got back on the rails. But then they started trading water and all kinds of stuff. And they started losing money. And when they started losing money, they started hiding it. And, we know the rest of the story. Yeah. But the idea that you could invert the business model and go from a company that is focused on moving natural gas from point A to point B to trading natural gas on the information about what gas is moving is radical. And I said in the fourth shock, if you had a way to secure data, you could do this on a global basis on every commodity, every product, every good, every service. And the value creation is going to be tremendous. And so my big kick now is data is a new asset class. And if you have data and you know how to use it, why is Facebook worth $1 trillion or $2 trillion, whatever it's worth, and Exxon's worth $260 billion? Because Exxon has data. They have crucial data. They know more about the supply of oil and gas, but they don't see it as they don't see it the way Enron saw it. They see it as that's just our information for improving our day-to-day operations. Data is a byproduct of operating a business. That's Exxon's, and they're too old and too stuck in their ways. They're never going to change. Some physicists said physics advances one funeral at a time, and business is a lot like that. You're never going to get the CEO of Exxon, who has bigger problems than figuring out how to monetize his data to change, but it's going to happen. And so why is that? So my contention is data is an asset, and I'm not alone. It's becoming pretty common to hear data is the new oil. But what does that really mean? Well, I'll tell you what it's going to mean. You're about to witness, I believe, in the next few months, the world's first data-backed leverage buyout. And so somebody
Ron, 1 second. You have to explain. What does that mean? Explain what that means.
Okay, so a leverage buyout was very popular in the United States in the 80s. But a leverage buyout is quite simple to explain. When you go to buy a car, at least in the United States, I assume it works the same in England, you go to the bank and you say, hey, I want to buy this, this Mercedes. Mm-hmm. Well, how much is it? $100,000. Well, I don't have $100,000. Well, that's why I'm at the bank. So I want to borrow, $100,000. Well, okay, what's your collateral? What are you going to pledge against this $100,000 loan? You say the car, but you don't own the car. Well, when you give me the $100,000, I will own the car. And when I own the car, I'll pledge it as a collateral. That's a leverage buyout. You use the asset you're trying to acquire as the collateral against a loan.
But the asset you're trying to acquire, in terms of a car, depreciates the very moment you pull it out of the garage. So how can you use that as your leverage?
Well, that's why you usually have to put down money, right? Depending on your credit score, you have to put down 20, 30% because it's going to fall off the first day.
Absolutely.
So that's, yes. So it's not a perfect example. Well, it is an example, but that would be a risk factor you would take into, if you're the lender, you would obviously calculate that into your risk.
Yeah.
So now just do that on a big scale. So let's say I wanted to buy Exxon and I went to Goldman Sachs and I said, I need $500 billion to buy Exxon. Mm-hmm. And they're going to say, well, you got any money? No, that's why I'm here. And so I'd pledge the assets of Exxon. And of course they would say, well, how Exxon's only valued at $268 billion on the market. How can you justify paying $500 billion for it? What you're going to say, and I'm using Exxon as an extreme example. I don't think it's going to be anywhere near that scale to start, but it's possible at one day, but not today. And I'd say, well, I think Exxon is sitting on so much information, and I think that information could be sold or licensed or used in trading activities, and it would be worth $1 trillion.
Gotcha.
And here's the problem in the world today, Carlton. This is the rub. If I say the data is worth $1 trillion, you say you're crazy. Well, if it's worth $1 trillion, how come Exxon's only worth $268 billion? Because the accounting world has failed the economic world, because there is no accounting standard to value data. I'll give you a perfect example. In 2009, when I was writing The Fourth Shock, Northern Telecom, a big telecoms company here in the United States, filed for bankruptcy. When they filed for bankruptcy, they said, our company is worth $3.2 billion. And here's what, this is what his business is worth. All our cell towers, our trucks, our phones, all this shit. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. And then they said, the accountants said, and their intangible assets, customer list, information about their processes, that's worth $100 million. Okay, so 3.5 billion operating business, 100 million everything else, intangible assets. When they came out of bankruptcy 3 years later in 2012, the operating business, which I think is now part of Verizon, was sold for $3.5 billion. So a little bit higher than when they first went in. Mm-hmm. The intangible assets, the $100 million, was sold for $4.5 billion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
More than the operating business. So how is that possible? So who's at fault here? Well, if you're the CEO of Northern Telecom and you know your $100 million asset is actually worth $4.5 billion, you wouldn't even file for bankruptcy. Yeah. So all those pensioners, all those working people who put their money in pensions that invest in these big dumb companies that then go under, you think those asset managers care? They don't give a damn. It's just whatever. But those working people lost their money because the accounting world couldn't value data appropriately, and they still can't.
Right. This is fantastic. 2 shows ago, when this goes out, it'll be 2 shows ago, I was speaking to, as I said to you before, a man in the city. And what he was saying was there are ludicrous evaluations on companies. Companies that show nothing, companies that have actually got storefronts or whatever else. In England, you can say Sainsbury's, let's call it Walmart in your place. Walmart, much bigger, it probably even owns Sainsbury's. Walmart, it's massive. So companies like Walmart are valued less than companies like maybe Peloton, right? Mm-hmm. Now, and he was saying, as far as the city's concerned, the valuation process is wrong. Mm-hmm. They'll go with it because obviously it's making money for everybody. but the valuation process is wrong. Now, from what you've just said to me, flashed up in my mind, straight in my mind's eye, were 3 letters. From what you've just said to me now. And those 3 letters were NHS. To us, that's the National Health Service.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
From what you're saying to me, the data that the NHS has on 68 million, I guess, 68 million people must be worth, because I think it's the largest national health system in the world, must be worth, because most others are split into different companies, even in Germany, where it's a quasi-national system, they're split up into AOK and various other different companies. But the point is, when you've just got one, and it's got all this data from cradle to grave, what is this worth? And that is why I think American companies, and this is where we come back to America again, because you're aggressive, much more aggressive than the United Kingdom. American companies will die to pick up this data.
Yes, they might even kill.
Ron, you are the man. Absolutely. So, because this is just unbelievable. So when you take away, which is what the Conservative government is taking away some of the protections on the NHS that have hitherto prevented this, it's open like a turkey at your Thanksgiving to be taken. Am I wrong? I mean, am I seeing something incorrect here, or is that?
No, you're absolutely right. And the NHS in our world, in my world of data as an asset, it's a famous example of the uncertainty of what value is. I think Ernst & Young put a value of $9 billion on that data, but when it was tentatively shopped for public bids, it was 10 times that amount, 90 billion. And so, or 80 billion. And so that data is worth a lot. Let me give you a real example. That's not a real example, but that's got a lot of government ethics and all kinds of, you got a lot of privacy. You got a lot of issues around that data that would have to be sorted out, but it's going to be, and that is going to be monetized. And
you think it's going to happen? You think it's going to happen? Yeah.
It has to happen because, by the way, it's not that this data is being, look, there's ethical issues around data, and that needs to be addressed, especially about personal data. My argument is that's not where the money is. There's a lot of money in that, but money's in supply chains. And as I was talking to, I want to, for one example, I want to take all the soybeans in the world. I want to know how much soybeans are being produced at any given moment. I go around the world and I put a little device in every soybean silo in the world that measures from the top of the silo down to the top of the soybean heap. And then I can know the volume, and then I can calculate how much soybeans are in every silo in the world. Then I take that data, I use NFTs for each farmer, and I send all that data up to a trading room floor, and then I trade because I know more about the actual real-time supply of soybeans than anybody else on the planet. I make a ton of money, and then I send the check back to all the farmers, and they all make money from doing what they were going to do anyway. Now they're making money. So then you create this positive.
But why do they make more money? This is Ron. I don't understand. Why are they making more money? Because you've valuated the data. Why are they making more money? Explain that bit.
It's not valuated the data. You took the data and you traded on it. It's the Enron example.
Right. It's a trade.
You're trading soybean futures, and now you know more about how much soybeans are actually in the world at any given moment than anybody ever in the history of the world. And so you can use that information to make money, big money, all day, every day. And then you make all this money and you send a piece of that money back to each farmer. Now, these farmers, so let's say you're a soybean farmer next to me in Ghana. And okay, I'm getting a check from my partner of, let's just say, $1 million a month. I'm just exaggerating. Sure. Yeah. And you are not getting $1 million. So all of a sudden, my farm is worth a lot more than yours. Yeah. And I'm making money. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to buy you out. I'm going to go buy your farm. And you know what's going to happen? I'm going to have more data flowing up to my partner. So then more data, better trades, more money, more successful farmers expand. and you create this positive feedback loop. It's called a network effect. It's Metcalfe's law, and it's a network effect. That the value of a network is directly proportional to the number of nodes on that network. And historically, that's been in the digital world, like telephones and faxes and computers linked together, then the internet. But you can take this now to the analog world. Just to give you an example of a business model, though. So look, I'm telling you what we just talked about here, Carlton. You're going to create more wealth in the next 10 years. I'll make this prediction. The human race will create more wealth because think of the Northern Telecom example. What if every company in the world is sitting on $4 billion or $40 billion or $400 billion? Why are the FANGs, or I guess they're the MANGs now, why are those technology companies worth $7 trillion? 5 of them are worth $7 trillion combined. Why is that? It's because of the data they have.
Yeah.
And so what if every company in the world woke up tomorrow and Ernst & Young said, everybody, your data's worth X. All of a sudden, you have a brand new asset class that is now sitting on balance sheets that you can borrow against. Yes. You can sell. You can do all kinds of things with it. So I predict in the next 10 years, the human race will create more wealth than possibly in all the history of humanity combined.
But my problem with that is, Ron.
Yeah, go ahead.
Will that wealth be centralized? Because you see, the tendency is, as you said quite rightly, the guy in Ghana says, well, the guy next to me, let's buy this fellow out. I'll give him threats because he doesn't know any better. And we'll buy him out and I'll take his. And I'll take the next one. And then the next process I would suggest is, I'm making $1 million. I'm paying out X amount of wages. Do you know what? I could not pay out so much salary because I could automize certain aspects. And now we're putting people out of work. Now, that doesn't matter to the business person, but it matters to the state, because then you're getting more and more idle hands without any work, without anything to do, without any food in their belly. And the ones who are doing well, they're doing nicely, so prices go up for the ones who are doing well, and then everybody else is pushed down. And the problem with it is the balance is out of sync. And then you have the guys that I would traditionally look at who then start saying about, let's destroy this system we're in because it's wrong and it's not doing anything for you. Now, I would have no problem with a guy saying, let's destroy the system we're in because it's not doing anything for you. And they were actually taking the action, taking the hit. But the problem generally is that the bloke who's telling them to fight for their rights isn't the bloke who puts himself out on the street. He allows other people to go out on the street to fight for his rights. Yeah. Uh-huh. And he, in the end, reaps the benefit of it when the negotiations come or whatever it might be. Sure. He sits back.
The perfect example of that, what you just said is, first of all, we can debate what you just said as far as how it's actually going to play out. But the best example is, you ever seen the movie Shrek?
Yes, absolutely.
You remember Lord Farquaad?
Yeah.
Gets in front of everybody. He goes, people of Farquaad,
exactly.
I have a brilliant plan. It is very dangerous, and many of you will die. But that's a risk I'm willing to take.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yes. Exactly right. See, this is why I like your idea of Napoleon originally. And Napoleon, was good in some cases and not good in others. But his original formative ideas, he was the guy on the ground doing the job of work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He was the guy leading. It's much easier for a fella who never goes on the ground to send you, the man in the army, to do his work for him and to die for him. People say, oh, what a brave fellow he was. No, he wasn't brave. He's not fighting. He's not the one dying.
The only thing I can say about all this is it's nothing new.
Yeah, exactly.
Kings have been sending us to our graves for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. But I thought the new world would make it more egalitarian. And if it does, great. But my fear is maybe it doesn't. That's what I'm saying.
Maybe it doesn't. But look, if you want a great book on the statistics, not the feelings, not the emotional or psychological, but if you want to read Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, brilliant book on what's really happening in the world. And so, yes, there's always winners and losers. Change is painful. Schumpeter's creative destruction is real. I am an agent of creative destruction. And so, and I'm proud of it. But those who end up on the receiving end of my deals, and when it's like a hostile deal, yeah, I plan to fire the CEO because you're useless. and so the CEO sees me as evil, but the shareholders generally do very well. So I'd rather have the millions of working people see me as a force of progress and good and justice even. And screw the rich. I mean,
Yeah,
if you don't
absolutely.
like it, you hire your attorneys, hire your accountants. You're using my money anyway. I'm a shareholder. You're using my money to fight me. Yeah. So I don't have any mercy for that. But what I think is really going to happen, it almost has to happen. And there's a lot we could talk about here. I mean, complexity. Mm-hmm. If all this value is being created, first of all, remember, for the system to work, you don't have to buy your neighbor's farm. Your neighbor just has to sign up. They just have to sign up in the same group. Yeah, so you have the same effect whether you buy them or not. If they join the same group and their data flows up alongside of yours, it's not a zero-sum game. So you could buy them out if you were, they were just too stupid to even come along, but you don't have to. So that's not necessarily so. As far as human labor and value, yeah, man. I mean, what's changing? And there was a great example when Milton Friedman went to China with Nixon in the 72. Mm-hmm. And they're standing around with Mao and they're looking at this big canal they're digging, and there's thousands of men with shovels just digging. And there's a giant steam shovel sitting right there. And Friedman looks at Mao and says, how come you don't use the steam shovel? He goes, no, in the West, you have capital and you use steam shovels. But in the East, we have people.
Well, people. Yeah.
So it's better to have 10,000 men digging with shovels and so we can employ them. And Friedman says, why don't they use a spoon? Why don't you employ 100,000? I mean, it's so stupid. So
it's interesting. It's interesting you said because it's the concept of, if you will, pure capitalism, if you will, as against capitalism that is in some ways mitigated. So let's take you to Spain, which you will no doubt know because you're a travelled man, right? You can go into most petrol stations, and a fella jumps out when you drive into the petrol station and he grabs hold of the nozzle and he puts petrol in your car. He doesn't do that because the petrol station isn't automated. He does that because otherwise there is no work. Mm-hmm. So what the Spanish state is doing, it's basically saying, employ this guy because idle hands are dangerous. Do you see what I mean? And this is what I think is the dichotomy. I think there's a battle which will go on, and this is, you won't believe it, Ron, we've gone over an hour, so we're gonna have to finish soon. But this is what I think the battle will be, Ron, is this. I have no doubt that tomorrow, and I'm making it that sharp, tomorrow you could have automated cars on the road that would drive themselves.
No doubt.
Tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. However, you're going to put out of work hundreds of thousands of people. No taxi drivers, no lorry drivers, no, you can go on and on and on. We can name the people, mm-hmm. delivery drivers, whatever, right? Who are all out of work overnight, right? Mm-hmm. What does the state do with those people? Right? This is the problem. I can see how business can function and say, I don't want that guy because Jack's been sick 3 times this week. Gloria is always having a problem with her back, etc., right? Yeah. But the problem is, what we're trying to mitigate against is against that fella who's sitting and waiting, that woman who's sitting and waiting to turn around and say, this system is undermining you. This system is destroying you, and we need to tear it down.
Okay, but Carlton, do you know where it's going to end up? You're going to figure out how to tax all this stuff because you're going to have a lot of profits. Then you're going to start reducing work weeks. 4-day work weeks around the corner. And then you're going to reduce it to 3-day work weeks so you can spread the work out. Now, the question is, what are people doing on the rest of that time? Because it's not going to be abrupt. It's going to be, I think, an evolutionary process. You know where those people are going to be? In the metaverse. Did you see Microsoft's acquisition this morning? $68 billion. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn all the entire human race into a hedonistic, escapist culture, while the machines do all the work. And so I don't know if that's utopian or dystopian or probably some mix of both.
So in the middle.
But it's not going to be a switch. There's a lot of complexity in everything we're talking about today. It's been fun, by the way. I just want to give real quick. the worst business model, not the worst, the most nefarious business model, arguably in history, was 23andMe. If you want to talk about data and you want to talk about the value of data, 23andMe went around and said, you spit in a cup and you send us $100, yeah, we'll give you where you come from, but we own your DNA.
Yeah.
Okay. So they didn't pay you for your DNA. You paid them to take it. They took that shit and they put it together and they sold it to GlaxoSmithKline for $300 million for 3 years. Then when that 3-year period was up, they're now worth $48 billion. And they didn't even pay for their material. They got paid to take it.
And I got to take my hat off to him. It's good business. I got to take my hat off to him because it's great business. It is.
Yeah.
You can't argue it. You know, they thought about it, and it's good business. It's very true. And I'm going to leave you on this one. Finland, forward thinking, already 3 years ago, so before the pandemic, 4 years ago, did an experiment. I think, don't get me wrong, the data might be wrong, but I think it's with about 100 people. It might be 1,000. I know it's a 0 figure, where they said to them, don't work. We're going to pay you to stay at home. Because what they wanted to see is how it will work in the future when there is no work. Mm-hmm. So they basically paid either 100 or 1,000 people to stay at work, stay at home, and they paid them as if they were working. Because they wanted to be ready for the time when there isn't the work. It's incredible. Cool. They're thinking ahead. This is great.
Yeah, cool experiment. And I said the other day, people, you know, the human mind, I had 3 separate conversations and then something synthesized in my brain. And I'm like, oh, I need to do this. And I was walking in a park with a friend of mine. I'm like, this is the value of the human mind. And it's the only value that the human mind has that I can tell that can't be replicated by a machine yet. And it is the ability to take different ideas and synthesize it into something new. Mm-hmm. But humans who cannot do that, humans who can only repeat what they've been told, they're going to be pretty useless in the future. And so because mechanical knowledge is not very interesting, machines will know all that. Yeah. So, you know, you've got to learn how to think, and we could do a whole show on the educational system and how backwards ass that is. But anyway, I don't want to keep going on, but I love talking to you, man. And
likewise. Yeah. Listen, we've only scratched the topsoil now. We haven't even gone even deep. So we will have you back on if you're happy to come back on, my friend.
I'd be happy to. I'll be coming to England soon. I'd love to meet you.
Brilliant. Likewise. So we'll sort that out. We'll have you back on because there's a whole lot of issues that we haven't even touched on as to what will be the system that forwards this. Is it crypto and the blockchain, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, we haven't got time now because we just spent our time talking correctly on other issues. But is that the case? What are the negatives already of this process? You know, what are the criminals already thinking of? What are the intelligence agencies already thinking of in this process? So that's what I wanted to touch on as well. But we haven't had time to. We've just gone superbly through it. Ron, listen, my friend, it's been an absolute pleasure. Same. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Pleasure. We will have you back on, as I said before, and we'll go down deep into the weeds. So, ladies and gentlemen, where you've been, I'm going to come back to you, Ron, for the end. And for one end, just think about it. One end, couple of words at the end. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to a man who has actually been one of the individuals who's moved how we are thinking throughout the last several decades. And his way of doing things has shown that. So you've been given knowledge. Hopefully, you guys and gals will work with that knowledge which you've just heard. Ron, last words from our listeners.
You know, thought is the enemy of perfection. Don't overthink things. Experience things, get in there. And we're blessed to live in the most interesting time. But it's going to be a lot of dislocation and a lot of challenges. So, enjoy the ride. That's all I can say.
Thanks very much. Enigmatic to the end, my friend. That's brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.